Hey everyone, we're coming back for another deep dive with us here at Asthma Friend. Someone who was thinking about joining our community, posted on Threads the other day, and it got us thinking. They were talking about being at a concert and having to deal with people smoking, like right next to them, even though there were designated smoking areas. It was really frustrating for them, especially because they have asthma. And it just got us thinking about, how do you manage triggers that you can't control? And it kind of sparked a bigger conversation here. So we wanted to explore it a bit more with all of you today.
Yeah, it is interesting because it brings up something that we talk about pretty often here, which is, like how do you manage those triggers you can't control? Passive smoking, it's almost like this invisible cloud that hangs over you, especially in a place like India where we are.
Totally. And, their thread was from at Brownie Runner, and it really captures that feeling. They said that the smoking areas were clearly stated at the concert, but people just weren't following the rules.
Hmm.
And then they asked this question, and it's like, do I keep on convincing people to follow the rules? And I don't know, I really felt that because it shouldn't be on them to police other people's behavior. I
Yes,
don't know.
for sure. And it shouldn't be their responsibility. And that's why, really understanding passive smoking or secondhand smoke is so important. Because think about it, you're involuntarily breathing in the smoke from someone else's cigarette. And it's not just the smell, right? It's over 7,000 chemicals. Many of them are toxic, and some can even cause cancer.
7,000,
Yeah.
seriously.
Unfortunately, that's true. So just imagine, breathing in those toxins with every breath you take. And that's what, a brownie runner was facing at that concert. And for someone with asthma, that's incredibly dangerous. All of those chemicals, they irritate the airways and that can trigger a cascade of symptoms.
So it's not just like a little cough here or there, right?
Right.
This is seriously impacting their health.
Exactly. Even brief exposure to secondhand smoke can inflame the airways and cause them to produce more mucus. And then breathing becomes a struggle, and that can lead to wheezing, coughing, and even severe asthma attacks that could land someone in the hospital. And, in India specifically, there are some challenges that make this whole issue even more complex.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I've read that smoking is really prevalent in India, right?
Yeah, it is. Studies show that almost 12% of adults in India smoke, and the vast majority of them are men.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, you have smoking inside, especially at home, that is still very common in many families. And that puts non-smokers, women and children at a much higher risk.
Oh, wow. So even if you are super careful about managing your asthma triggers at home, you might still be exposed to secondhand smoke there.
Absolutely. And then you add in public spaces, even though India has laws and designated no smoking zones, enforcement is weak. You might see people smoking in restaurants, workplaces, even on public transport. It's like this disconnect between the rules and what actually happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember reading about a law in India, COTPA, that's meant to create these smoke-free zones. What's going on with that? Why isn't it more effective?
Well, COTPA, the Cigarettes and Other Tobacco Products Act, is a good step. But it's been hampered by a few things. Imagine a restaurant owner who knows about COTPA, but they don't enforce it because they're worried about losing customers. That's the reality in many places. You have these gaps in implementation, a lack of awareness, and not enough support from the government to really make it work as intended.
So it sounds like we've got this law that's not really working, a lack of awareness, and a culture where smoking is kind of just accepted. It all feels kind of overwhelming. Like,
Yeah.
what can we even do about it?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, no doubt, but it's not hopeless. I think it really requires us to think on multiple levels. Individual action is crucial, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. We need to be pushing for change on a larger scale, too.
Okay, so where do we start with that bigger picture then? Like, what needs to happen to really address passive smoking in India?
Well, I think one of the first things is making sure that TOTKA actually has some teeth, you know?
Hmm.
Stronger enforcement, stricter penalties for breaking the rules. Like if someone lights up in a no smoking zone, there should be real consequences. That would really send a message that this is serious.
So it's not enough to just have the law on the books. People need to know that breaking it will actually cost them something.
Exactly. But we also need to work on the awareness side of things. If someone doesn't understand how dangerous secondhand smoke is, especially for people with asthma, they're much less likely to care about following the rules. So public awareness campaigns are key here.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I imagine a one-size-fits-all approach probably won't work right. Like what might resonate with someone in a city might not be effective in a rural village.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We need targeted messaging that considers different audiences and their specific cultural contexts. So think about campaigns designed specifically for young people, for families, for rural communities.
Yeah.
The language, the visuals, the channels we use to reach them, it all needs to be tailored.
Hmm. It's almost like we need to shift the whole conversation around smoking in general. Right now it's often seen as this social thing, even a status symbol in some circles.
Yeah.
So how do we change that?
It's a tough one for sure, but I think it starts with promoting the idea that a smoke-free environment benefits everyone. Healthier families, healthier communities. We need to challenge those old perceptions and make it clear that respecting others' health means respecting their right to breathe clean air.
And I think education plays a huge role here too. We need to start young teaching kids in school about the harms of smoking, both firsthand and secondhand. It's about building a generation that understands the risks and chooses not to expose themselves or others to it.
I couldn't agree more. Imagine if that became the norm, kids growing up just knowing that smoking is harmful not just to them, but to everyone around them. That would be a huge shift.
Yeah, and it's not just schools, right? Healthcare providers are on the front lines too. They can talk to patients about the dangers of passive smoking and help those who want to quit find resources.
Absolutely. Imagine a doctor saying, hey, I know quitting is tough, but here are some options. Let's work on this together. That kind of support can be a real game changer. It shows patients that someone is in their corner fighting for their health alongside them.
So it's really a team effort, isn't it?
Like,
Government agencies, healthcare professional schools, and even just individuals all working together to tackle this.
it really is. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that the choices we make affect not only ourselves, but those around us. And when millions of people's health is at stake, it's time to stop seeing passive smoking as just an individual problem and start addressing it as the public health crisis that it is.
Okay, well, I'm feeling a little more hopeful now. But before we get too big picture, let's bring it back to the individual for a second. If someone's listening to this feeling overwhelmed, what can they do right now to protect themselves and maybe even spark change in their own lives?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that has so many great answers and so many different ways to think about taking action. There are concrete steps that you can take today to make a difference, starting with your own home and extending out to your community. And we're going to explore all of that and more right now.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture stuff, but let's zoom in a bit now. What could our listeners do today, like right now, to protect themselves from passive smoking?
Yeah, that's where we empower ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming, but honestly, even small changes can make a huge difference. Let's start at home.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if you live with a smoker? That feels tricky.
It can be, yeah. But I think open communication is really key here. Sit down and have a conversation with your family about the impact of secondhand smoke. Explain, how it affects everyone, especially if someone in the house has asthma. Encourage them to smoke outside, away from doors and windows. It's not about blame. It's about protecting everyone's health.
Yeah, I like that approach. It's a team effort for sure. And while they're outside, maybe we can tackle the air inside.
Exactly. Air purifiers with HEPA filters, those can be game changers. They remove those tiny little smoke particles from the air, making it much cleaner to breathe. It's a really good investment, especially if you live in a place with high pollution levels.
So even if you can't control all the smoke, you can at least control how much you're breathing in. What about when you're out in public, though? How do you navigate that?
Just be mindful of your surroundings. When you're choosing a restaurant or a cafe, look for smoke-free options. And don't be afraid to politely ask someone to put out their cigarette if they're smoking in a designated non-smoking area. You'd be surprised how often people are just unaware of the rules or they just forget.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've definitely been in those situations where you're just like constantly dodging plumes of smoke. This feels like a game of smoke cloud avoidance sometimes.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's about advocating for your own health.
And for others who might be affected too, if you see someone struggling, maybe even having an asthma attack, don't hesitate to help or call for assistance. We have to look out for each other.
Speaking of looking out for each other, I know that quitting smoking can be really hard. Are there any resources out there for people who want to kick the habit?
Absolutely. There's nicotine replacement therapy, counseling support groups. There's a ton of help out there. Talk to your doctor or check out organizations like the World Health Organization. They have tons of information and can point you in the right direction.
So there's hope, even if quitting feels impossible right now. But what if, for whatever reason, you just can't avoid exposure completely? What then?
That's where those N95 masks come in. Think of it like a shield for your lungs, especially in really crowded or smoky places. They filter out those harmful particles so you're breathing in less of the bad stuff.
Okay, that's good to know. It feels empowering to have those tools.
Yeah.
But we can't just stop there, right? What about advocating for change on a bigger level?
Yeah, that's where we go from personal action to collective action. Support organizations that are fighting for smoke-free environments and stronger laws. Talk to your local representatives, sign petitions, make your voice heard. Even something as simple as tweeting about this issue can raise awareness.
I love that. It shows how even these small actions can ripple outward and make a real difference.
Exactly. Remember, you're not alone in this. Millions of people in India and globally are working toward a smoke-free future.
Well, I have to say I'm leaving this conversation feeling a lot more empowered and hopeful. What would be your one key takeaway for our listeners today?
I think it really comes down to this knowledge is power. The more we understand about passive smoking, the better we can protect ourselves and each other. Don't underestimate your own impact. Every conversation, every action, even just choosing to avoid a smoky area makes a difference. We can create a healthier world one breath at a time.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into passive smoking and asthma. We hope you feel informed, empowered, and ready to take action. Until next time, stay informed, stay healthy, and keep breathing easy.